Welcome to another edition of Tim's Vinyl Confessions. When this one hits, if I time this correctly, it's going to be Christmas Eve. So basically when Christmas Eve hits, I'll probably be too busy to sit and record an episode. I haven't gotten to New Year's yet, obviously, but I do want to thank everyone for their support throughout the year. It's been a fantastic year for me in a lot of ways, and the show, I've enjoyed doing the show. It's been over 2 years now of doing it, and with the feedback I get, it makes me think, okay, there's an audience out here to watch me spout off my musical opinions and go through some of my collections. So I look forward to finding some more cool musical stuff in the new year and doing some new episodes. You know, some with Matt, some with Will, possibly some with my kids, Marley and Jack. Had episodes with all of them over the past year. The nice thing is when I get comments from an older episode that someone's just picking up. That's fantastic. I don't think these are particularly dated unless I'm talking about an album that just came out, but I haven't had anything yet where I've really changed my opinion on something that I've done. So today, it's not a musical review. It's actually a book review, but it's very musically oriented. Earlier in the year, we have seen some good biographies, autobiographies come out. Phil Collins from Def Leppard put out a good one. You've seen me post photos of that called Adrenalized. That's a really good book. I've read lots about Def Leppard. I was really excited about the book that I'm about to talk to you about and show you because it's from a guy I've been a fan of for a long time, fan of his band. And it's a really, really interesting story if you're from my neck of the woods, the Maritime Provinces of Canada, because not exactly a classic rock hotbed, but one band made it out of the Maritimes and made a mark, certainly in the States, in the UK, and other parts of the world, and that band is April Wine. Lead singer of April Wine, main songwriter, guitar player, just musician extraordinaire, Myles Goodwyn, shares a birthplace with me, that being Woodstock, New Brunswick. Not a hometown, a birthplace. And he talks about that in the book. Basically, April Wine came in a very small place in Nova Scotia called Waverley. Here's the book. Myles Goodwyn, Just Between You and Me. If you have to ask why he called it that, you've probably never ever heard of April Wine. So there it is in the corner. Founding member of April Wine. This is Myles' story. His memoir, he's calling it. Lots of quotes from fellow musicians and music industry people talking about the book. Burton Cummings, Alex Lifeson, Alan Doyle from Great Big Sea, Tom Cochrane. You get inside the book, there's Sass Jordan, Jeff Stinko from Simple Plan, Barry Stock from 3 Days Grace, Rob Reiner of Anvil, Sam Roberts, Paul Dean from Loverboy, Ian Thomas, Bruce Guthrie, Lee Aaron, some other ones here too. Matt Anderson, another maritime artist, talking about this. You know, even if you're not a fan of April Wine, but I am. This is the story of how someone can come from a very, very unlikely place and, you know, eventually go to sell millions of albums worldwide. And it's an interesting story. It's a story that I've not heard much about. I know the albums. I know when they came out. I know a little bit about the making of them. I know the songs on them, which ones were hits, which ones were not, when the band went on hiatus initially, when they came back together. But I never do much of anything about why all these things happened. You know, why did the Hedmans leave? Why did Gary Moffat and Jerry Mercer come on board? Why did Jim Clench leave? Why did Steve Lang come on board? Why did they decide to get another guitarist in Brian Greenway? Why did the band split up in the mid-'80s? When they got back together, how come it wasn't the same lineup? All of these things and more Myles talks about in Just Between You and Me. Great book. Really, really enjoyed reading it, and it goes into a lot of detail about his upbringing, which was not an easy upbringing. He lost his mother at a very early age. It was just his father and his brothers in this little tiny place in Nova Scotia. And how do you get from a little tiny place in Nova Scotia to eventually putting out a record that goes platinum in the States, sells 1 million copies? How do you get from recording with the likes of Mike Stone, legendary producer Mike Stone, who worked with Queen of all people? You know, how's a kid from the Maritimes do that? He tells you how. It was not easy. Various steps along the way, various record company problems, problems with Aquarius Records. A very interesting story about problems with FRE Records, who put out the 2 April Wine albums that came out in the early 90s, Attitude and Frigate. Attitude was a successful album, great album, probably their heaviest, went gold. and then the next album was almost as good, but it's disappeared. Well, that's because the record company went into business. I don't want to give too many spoilers, but all of these things he talks about. He talks about living in the Bahamas for a time in the mid-'80s, recording his solo album that came out in 1988, eventually getting calls about putting April Wine back together. There's a lot more to the story than I thought happened. I thought once they got back together, well, it doesn't get too exciting. Well, it does. I didn't know that as recently as 2008, Myles almost died from alcohol. This would have been the last time, as of this recording, the last time I've seen April Wine 5 times in concert, and they're always great. Tight band, one of the tightest bands you've ever seen. Last time I saw them in concert was in Fredericton at the Playhouse 2008. Well, it was later that year that he had his near-death experience, which opens up the book. Great read. Great read. It talks about, they were in Aquarius in Canada, as I talked about going through the records and cassettes on the April Wine episode. But talking about being on Big Tree Records in the U.S., London Records, and eventually Capitol. It's a good read, and it's something that I've wanted to read about for a long time. I've been reading that he's been going to do this memoir for quite a long time, and it's just one of those things I didn't know if would ever see the light. It's interesting now how just a few years ago, they were putting out a thing where he basically wanted to replace himself in April Wine. He wanted a singer and a guitar player to carry on touring with the band because he didn't want to do it anymore, and that actually didn't happen. And basically, he said, "Okay, we'll just scale back." It talks about why Jerry Mercer left this last time. Always figured he retired. According to this book, he didn't retire. There were other reasons. Talks a little bit about Jim Clench, who unfortunately is no longer with us. He passed away 6 years ago. When I saw April Wine in concert for the first time, it was '94. Saw them in St. John, New Brunswick, and had the pleasure of meeting Myles, Brian Greenway, and Jim Clench. Didn't waste a lot of their time. Got their autographs, shook their hands, and got their signatures and all of that. It's just one of those, you've heard. Another thing, if you're not really into April Wine, but you've listened to radio in Canada, it might surprise you to know that that same band that you hear singing "I'm on Fire for You, Baby" is the same band that sings "Roller," is the same band that sings "Tonight is a Wonderful Time to Fall in Love," is the same band that sings "I Like to Rock," it's the same band that sings "Just Between You and Me." Interesting story about how Myles picked some of the songs he did, because they did have a lot of their hits. Not a lot, but the few significant ones were actually cover songs, like "Sign of the Gypsy Queen." Talks about how he took like a sort of an unlikely folky type song, turned into one of their heaviest rockers and just coolest all-time songs. "Weeping Widow" was a cover. "You Could Have Been a Lady" was a cover. All of that stuff and more is talked about in there. But he talks a lot about his personal relationships and how he has so many regrets about being an absentee dad for his kids being born. He talks about his youngest son, who he talks about this in concert. When he's in concert, they both have some form of diabetes, and so he's very much involved with that as well. And you read this, you talk about him being, mentioning some of the famous people that he's worked with and has met over the years. And then it comes back to me, this guy was born in the same little town that I was born in, grew up in the same general area, the general region of Canada. Usually artists that made it out of Canada came from the bigger places, came from Toronto, came from Vancouver. But as far as classic rock goes, April Wine, they're like the maritime success story. And there are a lot of other great musicians that came out of this area, don't get me wrong there, but April Wine were the one that made such a big mark, and I'm a pretty big fan, always have been. So it was, if you got a reader on your list, probably too late for this year, but if they don't get it for Christmas, I've got a birthday coming up, I would recommend picking this up. Myles Goodwyn, Just Between You and Me, his memoir. Thanks for watching this edition of Tim's Vinyl Confessions, and oh yeah, by the way, Merry Christmas.